So, what is it and how does it work? So, IMI is a public-private partnership. What does it mean? First of all, from the founding point of view, we have funds from the European Commission, so from the public side, but also an investment from the pharmaceutical companies. And this is an equal partnership, one-to-one funds. This is the biggest such project, biggest such partnership in the world in the R&D and life sciences. And the goal of this partnership is to indeed make the R&D process in Europe more effective, more efficient, and more attractive for the companies or for the collaborators to come together in Europe. We want to also enhance European competitiveness, so promote and help for businesses to become created or sustain them, and also address key societal challenges, so the key difficult diseases that we still don't have good treatments for. Such as dementia, such as diabetes, cancer, and so on. So as I mentioned, the features are one-to-one funding, but joint decision-making. So always, in all of our projects, you have always on one side the public participants, on the other side the private, so the pharmaceutical industry, and they always work together and collaborate very closely to conduct those projects. All the public, so the European funds, go to public institutions. We call them beneficiaries. So these are universities, hospitals, any scientific research organization, non-profit organizations, but also small and medium enterprises. Very important stakeholders are regulatory agencies, public health bodies, and also patient organizations. The large pharmaceutical industry, they invest, on the other hand. They don't provide cash, although sometimes it is also possible. But largely, they provide expertise. They provide human resources, so the actual live scientists are working on those projects, side by side with the scientists from academia. They provide other resources, such as instruments, samples, compounds, and so on. The key concepts are that this is so-called non-competitive collaboration. That means these are the areas where the pharmaceutical companies decided they can actually collaborate. They can forget that they are competitors and they can actually come together and try to solve some of those challenges. And they also realize that they cannot do it just by themselves, just industry, separately from the other scientific community. So they need help from universities, from scientific institutions, and so on. The concept is that to choose the partners for the industry, we conduct competitive calls, which I will explain in more detail in a little bit. But we want to make sure that we find the best scientists, the best experts to work together to solve those challenges. And another key aspect is the open collaboration. So we promote as much as possible dissemination of the results, of course, when the partners are ready, but we promote the data sharing, we promote publishing and opening the results to the wider community. Why was IMI created and what are the main focuses of IMI program? Of course, one big one is disease heterogeneity. So the diseases, turns out, are more complicated than we thought previously. If we talk about diabetes, it's not just type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Sometimes you have conditions that are kind of in between, or it's type 1, but not really the typical type 1. So it turns out that there has to be a lot more research done to understand those diseases and therefore to treat them better. We don't have very good tools to predict efficacy and safety of the compounds, but of the treatment, but also to monitor the disease or to predict the disease. We don't have very good pharmacovigilance tools, so the tools to predict or monitor medicines that go to the market. What happens after? How can we make sure that they are safe after they are released to the public? The clinical designs that are currently employed are not up to date. They are definitely outdated. They need to be optimized. They need to be more efficient, more suitable for personalized medicine that's currently is becoming so important. Also, the socioeconomic approaches of the tailored therapies, because we are now getting more and more personalized medicine treatments, but the system is still the old system that's not updated to those new medicines. In many areas, there is no good incentives for the industry to invest anymore because it's been so difficult. There has been so many failures. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, there is no new drugs or no drugs at all. So all the compounds they've been trying to develop has been failing. And by creating IMI and helping industry both to solve the scientific challenges but also to invest together, we can help to overcome those barriers. There's also lack of training programs that are relevant to those new technologies, new approaches, and IMI also provides that. So how does it work? The typical IMI consortium is combined from EFPIA companies, so the big pharmaceutical companies. Usually there is 3, 5, sometimes 10 or 15. They come out with a topic or the area where they have an interest to work on or invest, where they have a problem to solve. In response to this request, so to speak, the public consortium forms, and these are the typical participants to the public consortium. So like I said, academia, hospitals, patient organization, small, medium enterprises, regulators. Those organizations receive funding from the European Commission through IMI for their activities, and the pharmas invest equally in the projects. So as far as the process, I mentioned already, the topics are identified by the industry. They are then optimized by IMI with the help of wider scientific community. So we have consultation workshops with experts in the field to make sure that we cover indeed what needs to be covered, that all the important aspects are included in the topic texts. And then the community is asked to respond to those calls for proposals, we call them. So they submit so-called expression of interest, but you can call them applications simply. The important part here is that mostly our topics are very complex. It's not just simply one area or one technology. It's usually very complex and multidimensional. Therefore, our projects require multiple partners to come together. On average, we see 10, 15 partners, sometimes more. And they come, like I mentioned before, from all these different backgrounds. So the key aspect is you have to address all the objectives that are stated in the topic text, because if you don't, you have much lower chances to be selected. So the evaluation is performed by a panel of independent experts, usually 5 or 6, sometimes 7 experts from all around Europe, sometimes the world, because we often invite experts from US or other countries. And they decide jointly which application is the best. That best application is then invited to join with the EFPIA consortium, so with the original companies that in the beginning expressed interest to participate in this project, and they together write a full project proposal. So what was proposed by the public consortium then is kind of merged with the pharma companies, because in each subtopic, because each topic has work packages. This is almost like a project combined with 5 or 6 different smaller projects. So each work package has a contribution from industry and then contribution from the public partners. They have to figure out who is going to do what, who will invest this much money or need this much money for performing their tasks, and so on. So in the end, this is this comprehensive document, this plan of work, which we called full project proposal, which is again evaluated by external experts. At this stage, of course, there is no competition anymore because it's just one full project proposal, but the experts evaluate whether the incorporation of pharma and the public consortium is done well, whether all the recommendations from stage 1 have been taken on board, because there's usually many recommendations, and whether this project indeed should be funded if it indeed has a chance to have a big impact on the topic at hand. And then, of course, the project starts, they sign grant agreement, and they receive the funds, and they start working together. Now, I will tell you a few words about what has been achieved so far, including the latest Call 11. We have launched 11 calls. We will have, in the end, 59 projects. So we will spend altogether pretty much 2 billion euros, plus and minus. I'll show you the exact figures in a few minutes. This is the portfolio of IMI projects. So you can see this is including all the topics, including Call 11, which is still ongoing. We're still collecting applications for this one. You can see which disease areas are covered. We have, of course, big investment in infectious diseases, and this includes antimicrobial resistance, tuberculosis, vaccine development, so not only antibiotics. So nearly 760 million euros is invested in this disease area, and you can see which companies are participating to those projects. Next biggest area is drug discovery. In fact, this is 2 projects that cover this huge amount of money. And this is drug discovery platform where the project is both collecting libraries of compounds, but also performing high throughput screening of those compounds to potentially find new candidates for medicines, but also validating new targets and so on. So it's a very large initiative. I believe altogether they are looking at 500 compounds to start with. Next big area is brain disorders, so anything from Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, depression, autism. So quite a big investment with multiple projects trying to address that. And also you have the companies here for brain disorders, here for drug discovery. Next we have metabolic disorders, so especially diabetes. And the projects in diabetes are trying to address different problems, stratification of patients, so grouping them according to what's the characteristics of their disease, looking for biomarkers that can predict complications resulting from diabetes, looking for new treatments, looking for new tools, how to even try to discover new medicines. Then we have a big area in drug safety, which is very important. We have multiple projects looking either for, again, biomarkers to predict drug safety, or in silico models, so computer models, to look at molecules and try to assess, is this molecule going to be toxic or not before we even start working on it, before we spend any money, before we test it on animals or humans. And then another project looks at what happens after the molecules are released to the public. We have a big project in stem cells, actually 2 projects in stem cells, a few projects in cancer, again, many different approaches for either new treatments or diagnosis. Data management is a big area in IMI because we generate so much data and we want to make sure that we put it in the databases in the right way, that it's then can be explored. Then they develop also tools to explore that data. We have inflammatory disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis especially, but there's also others such as osteoarthritis, lupus. Development of biologicals, so biomolecules and all the issues associated with them. Geriatrics, it's quite a new project still being under evaluation under Call 9, but very important. So looking at frailty and sarcopenia, so loss of muscle mass and function and the consequences. There's a couple of projects on lung diseases, on asthma and COPD, so chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Education and training, as I mentioned, we have 5 projects that try to address different areas of education and training, try to prepare a new era of scientists that will be able to better participate in projects in the drug discovery and be adapted to this new challenging area of development of medicines. We have also chemistry projects such as sustainable chemistry, green chemistry, delivery of drugs, for example, oral delivery and formulations, the kinetics of drugs and relative effectiveness of medicines. So as you can see, it's quite broad. It addresses many different areas, many different diseases, many different technologies. So there's many different opportunities how Polish scientists can get involved. Collaboration is important. All those different stakeholders are important. That's why we try to attract all those different type of participants. So now I want to show you what do we have at IMI so far. We have, of course, participation dominated by scientists from universities or scientific organizations. So if you look at here, there's more than 600 teams from those research and university organizations. They work together with teams from the industry, but also we have many small and medium enterprises that develop new devices, new technologies, and work together with the scientists from universities and industry. We need patients on board of our projects, either patients or patient organization, patient advocates, to tell the scientists what is really important for them, what needs to be addressed and how they help to adjust that development process to make sure that their needs are being addressed. And also regulators. Regulators are very important because if IMI projects are developing new technologies, they in the end want to have them adopted by regulators. So they have to make sure not only their process is according to the regulatory rules, so they have all the supporting data or the supporting documentation, but also the regulatory framework sometimes needs to change or needs to be updated. And of course, regulators will not do that if they don't have evidence that that needs to happen. So they often stay close to IMI projects. Either they participate as partners, but often they are in advisory boards or they have informal or formal interactions with our projects to stay very close. We estimate we have more than 6,000 researchers so far in IMI projects. So all these people, we hope that in the end will improve the productivity of the R&D of pharma industries in Europe and bring better medicines to patients in the end. Some of the ways that we try to measure the performance of IMI is some of the obvious ones, for example, number of publications, and of course there is a lot and the numbers are growing, but this is not the most important part. The volume is important, the quality is even more important, and we can be proud that the publications are of high quality. The citation impact of our publication is twice the world average, and in all of these categories it exceeds the quality of average European publications. But what's important for us as well is the dissemination of knowledge. So we have about 600 publications, but they were cited 25,000 times. That's good. That means that the research, it's not just published and it sits there in the paper, but someone actually uses it to maybe take a little step forward. Collaboration, it's very important, and we try to assess that as well. We have looked at our scientists from the first 4 calls. We have identified about 4,000 scientists, and we looked at their publications to see, okay, do those people collaborate or not? If you see here, this is the number of publications, the color represents the number of publications. So there's quite a lot of publications coming out from Poland, but the collaboration, you cannot see it, but there's 3 lines coming out from Poland, going to Austria, Germany, and England. So not so much collaboration, because this very thin line is between 1 to 5 collaborative papers. So my advice, if you want to be more successful, for sure, you need to create more of those lines. That's the key. And so what you can see here on those 2 maps, those scientists, before they received funding from IMI, they collaborated already, so that's good. But then after they started at IMI, they collaborate even more. And you can see the orange lines show you the collaboration between different sectors. So publications where people from industry and academia are publishing together, or academia and small, medium enterprises. This is what we want to see, and I'll also show you why. We estimated on the publications coming out only from IMI, we have 61% publications that are between different institutions. So for example, University of Warsaw with University of Łódź. That would be cross-sector publication, cross-institution. Cross-sector if we have academia and SME, or academia and pharma together. International, that's obvious, different countries. So is it important? And I would say yes, because if you have any type of these collaborations, your citation impact, so the measure of quality of your publication, is much higher. So yes, you want to collaborate, not only to get good publications, but also to do great science that makes a difference. So now I will go from those purely bibliometric, looking at publications, because that's important. That's also how especially academic researchers are measured thus far. But we want to see that those publications end up into some advances in healthcare, not just stay published in the paper and nothing happens in the end. So I will give you just a few examples. One of the areas, as I mentioned, one of the biggest areas in IMI is infectious diseases and antimicrobial resistance. We have invested large amounts of money into this topic. And what are we trying to do? We are solving scientific challenges. So we are looking at why is the resistance developing? How can we prevent it from developing? How can we make sure that the antibiotics actually are going into bacteria and that we are treating the bacteria and killing it? And how can we produce new, better antibiotics that we don't have to be faced with this very scary aspect of antimicrobial resistance? Next big aspect is fostering new models of collaboration. So the industry is collaborating together. The industry is collaborating with the scientific community all around Europe, which is very important. Developing clinical networks, and this is what you see on this map. There's one project called Compact, and I'll show you a slide about it later, that is developing clinical networks across Europe. So far, there's 300 institutions that have signed up to be part of this network, and Poland is there. There's one university that expressed interest. It's Medical University of Łódź, but it's just one. There's still time to sign up. They actually, in fact, want to make this area participate more because Eastern Europe is very important. They want to cover the whole Europe as far as looking at antimicrobial resistance and participating to those clinical networks. What is required? You have to have a facility that's able to perform clinical trials for antimicrobial resistance or to recruit patients. So if there are institutions that are still interested, you can get in touch with this project and try to get involved. I'm sure they would be very happy to welcome you. We are also revisiting regulatory rules because, of course, the way antibiotics are being developed so far is not the most optimal way, and this needs to change. And also, there is no incentives for industry to develop antibiotics because, especially in the face of antimicrobial resistance, even if we develop a good antibiotic that works, nobody's going to want to use it because as soon as you use it, the bacteria will develop resistance. So this will be a last resort kind of medicine. So this is not something that industry is going to make a lot of money out of. That's why it's very difficult for them to work in this area, and it's not a very successful area either. So projects like IMI play a key role here. Another project from the antimicrobial resistance platform is this discovery of new antibiotics, and it's very interesting project because here The project is open for proposals from the wide community, scientific community, to propose molecules that are at the qualified hit stage, that if they are chosen to take on board this project, they will be taken through the hit to lead to candidate optimization all the way up to phase 1, of course, if the molecule is successful. So both public and private participants are invited to submit proposals for such molecules. Now, how IMI addresses brain disorders. I mentioned that it's quite a big area. We are looking at causes of autism, and this project, EU AIMS, has already made a huge progress in looking at what are the possible causes of autism and trying to find possible treatments. New treatments for schizophrenia and depression. This project, New Meds, one of the things that they have already achieved just by looking at data from clinical trials or combining data from many trials from different companies is that we can perform clinical trials in schizophrenia differently. We can reduce the number of patients. We can have the duration of the trial shorter. We can still achieve the same results, but with less investment, with less patients. So that's already a big step forward. Project Europain has identified new targets for chronic pain, and they are in process of validating those targets, and perhaps later to try to find treatments. There is projects to try to predict efficacy of drug candidates for Alzheimer's disease. Very important project, and with some important developments. All these different projects are also revisiting regulatory environment. It's relevant in most of our projects, most of our areas where regulatory environment needs to be adapted to the new discoveries. And again, incentives for industry. It's a very difficult area to treat all those different diseases. There's no good treatments and so many failures so far in the drug development process. So here, some examples from the autism project. No results yet from this clinical trial because it's ongoing, but this is going to be the biggest study in autism where they try to look at the biomarkers, identify biomarkers to predict onset of autism, and then they will validate those biomarkers in the second clinical trial. So quite an important effort. This project EMIF, which it's partly covering Alzheimer's disease, but on the part of the project is covering metabolic disorders. But from the Alzheimer's disease part, they have already looked at this preclinical Alzheimer's disease. They have identified some markers that can already characterize preclinical Alzheimer's disease, which predicts that those people within the few years will actually progress to Alzheimer's disease. And those are the perfect people to be studied and treated, of course, because it's early enough that the damage is not so bad that it still can be treated. So this is their first development, in fact, and they are working to find more of this type of markers to predict onset of Alzheimer's and then to follow the progression and also to follow the possible treatments. In diabetes, we have 3 projects so far and also quite a large investment. They are solving multiple scientific challenges, partly the heterogeneity of the disease, so trying to stratify patients to better treat them, to look at complications of diabetes, to look at measuring diabetes activity, so predicting or measuring the stage of the disease and trying to find treatments, and also to develop new tools for developing drugs for diabetes. I will give you some concrete examples here. Summit is a project that indeed looks at the complications. They have generated the largest GWAS collection from which they're identifying biomarkers for complications in the kidney from patients from both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. They have identified multiple biomarkers for kidney damage, retina damage, also vascular disease. So now those biomarkers are in the process of being validated. They have developed this very interesting ultrasound-based technology to visualize inside of the arteries. Instead of doing the typical histology where a doctor has to go in and cut part of your vein, they can now do it with the ultrasound machine. Non-invasive at all, would make it much easier, cheaper, and faster to look at to accumulation of plaque inside of the arteries. And they've been quite productive with 3 patents in preparation. The other project, IMI, they are more focused on the tools, developing tools for trying to treat diabetes. And they have developed the first human beta cell line. This is quite groundbreaking discovery because there was no human beta cell line before. And this one is now optimized to a second generation to be the most appropriate for drug discovery projects. So this is a very good platform to test new drugs, to see if they're working, and to develop new medicines. They also are working on biomarkers for diabetes, and they have huge repositories of human isolates. Another area that's large, and I also mentioned this, is safety and risk-benefit assessment. So examples, this project called Safety, they look at the kidney, liver, and vascular system, so potential drug-related adverse effects on those organs. They are trying to look at those by discovering biomarkers, of course. They have many potential candidates, and they are running 17 exploratory trials to try to validate them. They are very closely in dialogue with the regulators because, of course, if they develop any biomarkers for safety prediction, those would need to be accepted by regulators and then go to the clinical practice. This project eTox is the one that I mentioned about trying to predict whether the molecule is going to be toxic. So how are they doing this? Thanks to participation of all these different companies who decided to share their toxicology reports from the past. They have data on more than 800 substances linked to all these different studies on those molecules, and based on that, when you input a new structure into the database, this tool will help you to calculate how likely is it that this molecule is going to be toxic, either for heart or other organs. So this is quite an important tool because it helps you to estimate toxicity of just your idea. You don't even have to synthesize this compound. You can look at the structure and decide, okay, is this one a better candidate to start working on or not? So they have 90 such predictive models for different types of predictions. This project is Protect, and it's quite a unique one because it's actually coordinated by European Medicines Agency. So this organization, the regulators are in charge of this project. And what they are trying to do, they are trying to develop better tools, better mechanisms to either estimate benefit risk of medicines before they are released to the public, or monitor the risk or adverse effects of the medicines after they are on the market. And this is an example of how powerful such tools can be. There was this medicine, natalizumab, that was released to the public, but it turns out that it had this very dangerous side effect, but it only occurred in very small amount of patients. So what the Medicines Agency decided to do, they decided to actually take this drug off the market because of this potential risk. But the medicine was so good for the patient, it was preventing from relapse of their disease, so they actually advocated to the Medicines Agency that they want this medicine back. And in fact, if the assessment was done in such a way, comprehensive way, perhaps the decision would have been different, because the total overall benefit outweighs the risks. So this is the types of things that they are developing. What's important at IMI is also involving patients, and this is also something to consider when trying to prepare applications for IMI projects. When it's relevant, we already try to flag it for you in the topic texts, that this project is important, that you should engage with patients. So this is always kind of a plus. You might be ranked higher just because you have patients on board of your project, when relevant, of course. We try to engage them in many stages of IMI. We want to have them involved in projects, but we also want to have them involved in generating new topics, evaluating topics, and in discussions with IMI about next directions that we should take. So far we have 3 really great examples of projects where patients are very involved. UPATI is a project where they are actually providing training for patients, so then they can be involved in projects but also in policy making. UBioPred and Proactive are projects working in asthma and COPD. So this is why training of patients is important, because they need to be involved in many different aspects, from policy making, participating in clinical research, but also influencing how the clinical research is done, to participate in health technology assessment agencies and committees, research ethic committees, authorities such as EMA, MHRA, and so on. Already EMA is involving patients quite heavily in their scientific advice. And of course, to communicating with the public. So this project UPATI, they provide a training program to educate the patients if they want to be actively involved in advocating for their disease, but also getting involved in various ways. So I think this is my last slide, and as I said, this is my email address. You can either email me directly if you have questions, or you can email Infodesk, because when we receive emails to the Infodesk, those emails are directed to the person that's in charge of relevant projects. Each of those projects have a scientific officer in charge, someone like me. Those people take care of the project. They will be, in the end, managing the project, so they will be the most knowledgeable. Therefore, you can either email me and I can try to answer your question, or you will be directed to the person that knows most about the project. Visit our website, follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. So thank you very much.